Well, good morning, and it is indeed great to be here. Thanks, Bob, for the introduction, and thanks, General Shea, for hosting this great event. And I am one of the three first speakers you have today. You get the bookend General Holmes at the end of the day, and that'll be a very good talk as he looks at the third offset. I'm going to start the day by kind of looking at things through an operational lens and giving you an operational context, and that will maybe set the tone and foundation for a number of things that we'll discuss throughout the day. It's great to be back in San Antonio. My last time here, I was the A589. Sparky should be here somewhere in the crowd. He's currently the A589. Irv Lessel was the A589, and he is in industry now. He is here this morning. So a lot of us that have served in op plans, requirements, and have loved living in San Antonio and no more than me and my family just a few years ago. So it's great to be back. So this morning I'd like to tell you about how your Air Force is evolving in this cyberspace area, and then the efforts that are underway to cultivate and develop the culture, I think, that we'll need to outthink and out-innovate our cyber adversaries. Today we have over 67,000 members who have particular expertise in cyber operations, and everything from, as you might imagine, computer system programmers to network administrators to cyber warfare operators, both active, guard, reserve, and civilians. And they're developing, managing, and protecting our cyberspace infrastructure 3,600 seconds an hour, 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week. The Air Force is investing right now about $4.2 billion in the cyber enterprise in FY17. But the vast majority of those funds go toward providing communications and IT architecture, infrastructure, and services, and keeping that infrastructure and its associated capabilities up and running. So in reality, $4.2 billion is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to developing, fielding, and maintaining and operating in cyberspace. Practically every weapon system we have, either fielded or in development, involves some type of cyber component. Now think about all the onboard and offboard systems that have some sort of connectivity. We know here that facilities like this facility rely on cyberspace, water, sewer, power, and would you imagine fire alarms, and more. Even the thermostats that run this building right now have Cat 5 connections. Our logistics systems that include their own highly complex cyberspace, I can think of a number, but as a single example, think about our fuel management systems that the DLA uses. Our weapon systems, JD has talked about it, others have talked about the threat surfaces of our weapon systems. They have many, many touch points, both direct and through the RF spectrum. Operators to maintainers, industry partners to depots, data links, communications, sensors. You know, while I could go on, I believe the point has been made already. We have a lot of our total obligation authority, our TOA, directly tied to cyberspace. So it's in that context and in this environment that the Air Force is currently asking itself whether we are operating, whether we are appropriately balancing our investments in developing, in fielding, maintaining, and then operating in that cyberspace with the investments we need to perform both defensive and offensive missions within the domain. So of all the total we are investing in cyberspace, we're investing about $672 million dedicated to the cyber mission force. Others have talked about it this week. I think Murph has. Every time Ed Wilson from 24th Air Force gets up to talk, he talks about where we are with that cyber mission force. We're making good progress toward the 39 teams that you all have heard about. That represents about 2,400 highly trained professionals focused on defense and emerging offense, presented to U.S. Cyber Command through Afcea, with command and control executed through multiple joint force commanders. Currently, 26 of those 39 teams have achieved either initial operational capability or better, and they're providing unprecedented support in the joint and coalition force around the world, as well as in defense of our homeland. So this organization is a combined force consisting of cyber operators from both the 24th Air Force and cyber-savvy intelligence specialists from the 25th Air Force. In time, this cyber mission force capacity and capability will evolve, I believe, exponentially, not linearly. Not linearly, not literally, linearly. Did you guys catch that? Good. It'll be exponential versus linearly, affording a potent defense of our networks, systems, and infrastructure, and changing the way that we are able to delay, disrupt, destroy adversary systems through the non-kinetic means. Suffice it to say, I believe the cyber mission force will fundamentally alter the way that we exclusively associate lethal with kinetic effects. While this force is necessary, it's currently insufficient, I think, to meet the demands of the Air Force in executing all 5 of our core missions, and that's air superiority, air and space superiority, rapid global mobility, global strike, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and of course, the ability to command and control all of those forces. So we need a couple of things, both organic offense and defensive capabilities. And how we go about this, while not entirely clear, we're already taking the steps on what will be a multi-year journey. So because cyber forms the nucleus of this evolving battlefield, one that is growing more lethal by the day, and in order to best protect and best leverage this medium, the Air Force must partner, or I said better said, we are partnering with industry, civilian, academia, and key partner nations to outthink and out-innovate our cyber adversaries. And thank you, Afcea, for setting up the forum and hosting this venue to help us achieve that objective. So in a previous assignment, I was fortunate to serve U.S. Strategic Command and wear 4 hats. So I commanded 8th Air Force, a Joint Force Component Command for Global Strike. I was a Nuclear Task Force Commander called 204, and it had both bombers and reconnaissance. And I didn't know this when I took the job, but I also was fortunate to be the Joint Force Air Component Commander for U.S. Strategic Command. I remember distinctly General Kaler when he handed me the guidon 2 days before his big Tier 1 exercise called Global Thunder on a Friday, kicked off on a Sunday. He handed me the guidon and he said, "Don't screw it up, Vandy." Thank you very much, sir. Words of encouragement, words to live by. Don't screw it up. And what he meant by that was that we have a big exercise, his biggest, and generally you work up and train towards and have been going through all of the planning for this, and then you get to execute it. I stepped in 2 days prior to execution, and I felt like I was swimming in a uphill stream, like one of those salmon, you know, trying to go spawn up in the hills. And I remember distinctly the other 3 stars who were supporting me as the support head, integrator of fires and effects for STRATCOM, making phone calls to them and having VTCs. At the time, Lieutenant General Sue Helms was the 14th Air Force Commander, and Major General Mike McLaughlin was the 24th Air Force Commander. And a number of phone calls to them, Cyber Command and other components, Integrated Missile Defense, JFCC, ISR, to bring the team together to understand what did General Kaler mean when he said that he wanted me to integrate fires and effects for the command. As a supporting command in his Tier 1 exercise, we were tied to a supported geographic combatant commander who is also dealing with integration of fires and effects. And when they come to a functional component command, like a STRATCOM, and they're looking for solutions to things that they can't wrap their arms around, that's what General Kaler wanted us to do. He wanted us to provide integrated domain, airspace, and cyber solutions that were synchronized in time and space, that we could give to an Admiral Harrison Paycom, that we could give to General Breedlove, to get after the deep fight and things that they were unable to because they didn't have the forces assigned. And some examples of that are when we're getting our butts kicked in space, or when our adversaries are operating in a phase 1 or 2 and we are, as a big force, kind of in phase 0, phase 1 operations. Very difficult then to manage where your adversaries are, and the adversaries always get a vote, and how do we then collaborate across multi-level security multi-level authorities, because many of us know that have done this fight in cyber that the authorities are sometimes held at a very high level of government. So I was handed this 2 days prior to the exercise kicking off, a number of phone calls and a number of lessons learned, and here's a couple of them. The LNOs, which I had a couple space LNOs and a couple of cyber LNOs that were given to me by both the 624th AOC and the JSPOC. They sent me a couple LNOs. They were tremendously helpful. We had to do everything manually because the systems, the collaborative C2 systems, did not exist to allow the ease of movement from the top secret to the secret, where most of the AOC operates. And so how do we collaborate between those two, and then how do we get the authorities in place in plenty of time to execute, and then in execution, how is it that the cyber force is going to get the word to pull the trigger? One little story on that. When you're working with white cells and exercise environments and you don't have the real players playing, Cyber Command called to execute and get authorities for a particular capability. They got that authority from a person acting in that exercise role, and immediately, can you imagine what the Cyber Command did? They pulled the trigger, and off it went. And cyber effects in place, whatever happens, happens, and the JFAC, or the guy who's supposed to integrate it, I come in that morning, look at it and said, okay, how are we doing on synchronizing this kinetic activity with this non-kinetic activity, the cyber, the space, and thus these munitions? How's that going? And they said, hey, sir, we got bad news. Everything that we had synchronized got out of sync, and essentially it ruined the entire op that day. And in life, if you're like me, you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And that was an opportunity for us as components, a sub-unified command of STRATCOM, and all of the executing folks to really understand you really have to have someone in charge of the symphony and synchronizing those fires and effects, whether they're non-kinetic or kinetic. So we learned a ton in the manual products we had to do. And the last lesson we learned was kind of an unrealistic battle rhythm. Cyber strikes at the speed of light, does it not? I'm a long-range strike guy. You already heard I've flown all the bombers, the B-52, the B-1, the B-2, two of those in combat, and in the B-52 I sat alert, nuclear, real-world nuclear alert in the late 80s, and I consider that combat because we were fighting a Cold War at the time. But here's a guy who understands, I think, long-range strike. I think the long-range strike of the future, the capability and the weapons that we're developing in offensive cyber, that's truly going to be long-range strike that strikes at the speed of light. And we have to start to wrap our minds around that, and how do we synchronize those capabilities in time? How do we enable them in time and space to be that cyber wingman that JD talked about? When we go downtown, we may not have the ability to suppress enemy air defenses or destroy enemy air defenses. Our cyber escort might be the only escort that standoff munition needs to penetrate an integrated air defense or an anti-access aerial denial layered system, or it might be something else. But we have to start to think differently about how we warfight. The battle rhythm of that is very interesting when you're focused around a 4-star commander in the middle of the United States in the heartland of America, and you're supporting a combatant commander that's in Europe or in the Pacific in a fight that's around in a different part of the world. We learned in this exercise also that the combatant command needs to focus up and out. They need to focus on the National Capital Region and to do all of the Vol 6 command and control conferencing to get the authorities needed to pull the trigger when we need to pull the trigger. That's easier said than done, and it's going to take up an extremely large amount of that 4-star's bandwidth. Then he can give his components, in STRATCOM's case, his air component and his other maritime components and other cats and dogs that we have in STRATCOM, he can let them focus operationally down and in. So an up and out for that 4-star we learned, and down and in. And we also needed to shift our battle rhythm to the external anchor point, which was either Breedlove or Harris in the PACOM AOR. Very important that they understand that the supporting command is there to support the supported. That supporting support is very, very, very important. Fast forward a few months, Admiral Haney takes over. He comes to visit me down at Barksdale Air Force Base at the 608th AOC, and we show him our common operational picture. We show him that we have air, space, and cyber. We have an air tasking order, we have a space tasking order, and we have a cyber tasking order. And we're showing him the kind of the initial phases of how we're trying to integrate those into an integrated tasking order, or what air tasking orders normally are, airspace and cyber anyway. And we're showing him how we did it in the previous. We were getting ready to come up to another exercise, and he commented to me as I was moving the organization towards doing this every day. He says, Vandy, I want you to do this every day. I want this common operational picture from my situational awareness on what the cyber force is doing and what the space force is doing and what the air component is doing. And that harkens back, if you all heard Major General Matthews talk yesterday, we fight like we train. So instead of ramping up all this planning to do an integrated tasking order only for Tier 1 exercises, we started down the path of putting in place the tools necessary to do it every single day. I had great partners in that. So as General Raymond took over for General Helms at 14th Air Force, and as Ed Wilson took over for McLaughlin, great partners in developing some integration capabilities, a strategic warfighting integration capability called SWIC, some other kinetic, non-kinetic integration of fires and effects called KNIFE, a tool, and Admiral Haney was really tolerant of us doing beta tests during his Tier 1 exercises to help us to integrate the domains. And yeah, we would stumble, and we were definitely in the crawl phase of this Crawl Walk 1 journey, but he allowed us the latitude to do some betas, and those betas would not have been possible without the great partnership between 14th, 24th, and 8th Air Force, all supporting Admiral Haney at Strategic Command. So I got one more vignette I'll share with you, because that was more kind of strategic focused on the up and out versus down and in. Some operational applications of cyber you may not be aware of that are happening today. When we launch a weapon, when we drop precision-guided munitions, in the case of standoff munitions, it's a pretty expensive proposition. If you're in the United States Navy and you want to launch a salvo of Tomahawk land attack missiles, they are $1.3 million per missile. Very, very capable system. When you want to launch a CALCOM, we only have a certain number of those before we have to demill them in the very near future. Those are expensive propositions. The standoff surface missiles, the JASM, the extended range version, the JASM-ER, expensive missiles. The miniature air-launched decoy and its jammer version called the MAL-J, those are expensive. And when we plan those, and the way they were being planned for the warfight operationally is we'd give it to a unit, a tactical unit that had that assignment. Okay, you're a TLAM unit, you plan your TLAMs. Okay, you're a JASM unit, you plan your JASMs, you're this unit. So we weren't having the connectivity and tissue between the efforts by these tactical level planners. So operationally, we stood up this thing called the Standoff Munitions Application Center. And I think this crowd will be happy to know that it wasn't just a matter of bringing together Navy and Air Force and being more efficient in a laydown. It was adding the space and cyber elements that weren't there before. The precision navigation and timing pieces to provide better accuracy for the time and space that we needed that improved accuracy. We were able to take, in general, the number of weapons required to take down a single target would drop by 2/3 because we would put together the capabilities of the TLAM, the JASM, and the jammer in an EW environment with the cyber escort piece, with the space piece. And so if you can take out a target with 33 weapons instead of 100 weapons, you've just saved yourself $70 million on a single strike. It's a significant savings. Another example of how cyber is being integrated in to the kinetic, non-kinetic integration. ConOps, a concept of employment, series of experiments, and wargaming has led to a number of improvements. We wargamed a war plan for one of the AORs, and we found that the launch box that they had for their standoff munitions, if the crew had launched it from that box, the missiles would have never even made it to the target. These types of efforts are paying huge dividends to the warfighter in executability, in efficiencies, and in how we federate our targeting to include how do we do targeting federated for non-kinetic targets. And one last vignette before I continue with my comments is in multi-domain operations, we are the air staff, the A3 right now is championing because General Holmes his staff has put out this thing called the Air Force Future Operating Concept. And in that operating concept, it talks about this thing called multi-domain operations centers, which are really just AOCs, a little bit different name, but it gives the weight and emphasis to how we're going to fight in the future. We make a lot of assumptions about the future that we will be a multi-domain force. Us, airspace and cyber, are Navy partners in surface and subsurface, and of course then the Marines and the Army the Marines are combined arms in many different domains, but the Army on land, they also are integrating space and cyber. So this multi-domain operational approach is not unique to the Air Force. So we've been tasked to go out and kind of pull our arms around the stakeholders underneath the umbrella of the Air Force operating concept, and we're bringing together a ConOps that we think will set the path for the future. It's going to be evolutionary, and if I could say one thing about kind of where we're going, we're trying to push integration from the 4-star and 3-star level. We're trying to push it down to the airmen and the young officers that are actually doing the planning. Instead of planning air, space, and cyber, and then integrating it somewhere up the chain because of the authorities and the read-ins and all the clearances, we want our younger airmen to be thinking multi-domain from the get-go. It's very easy to think in your stovepipe. It's very hard to widen the aperture and to get our airmen to think about multi-domain from the beginning. And I think that this multi-domain operations mindset is going to be a big part of laying the foundation for building that cyber warfighter, that cyber warfighting ethos toward the future. And I'll have some comments about how we're going to recruit to that, how we're going to train to that in just a moment. So thanks for giving me a second just to share a few stories. Now I'm going to continue on some of my planned comments, but I wanted to give you a kind of a heart for some of operations so you have context. So the experience I had as the JFAC kind of opened my eyes to both what cyber can and what it cannot do. Because many times I'd be told, hey sir, I can take that down. I said, okay, how do you know? So I'm going to send this package in. Can you guarantee that that factor threat's going to be down? I said, okay, yeah, we think it's going to be down. Okay, what probability of success do you think you're going to have with that particular cyber tool? Well, I'm about 15% sure that that thing's going to be down. If it works like it's planned, I'm 100% sure. But there's about 85 other things that could go wrong. So, okay, then we may need to go a different approach. If I lose access, then, sir, the game's off. I can't do that. Well, then we need to figure out a different approach to have multi-levels of access. Mark Matthews told a story yesterday about B-52s and Linebacker 2. If those of you who were here remember, they lost a number of bombers, 8 of them, 100 B-52s on one night flying in a single line mission, one after another. On the December 26th, much later, they flew the same number of bombers and lost only one because they did multi-axis of attack. So when I think access, I'm thinking, how do I get to the target? And if we only have one access point through one server or one router to a target, that is a strategic air command approach like Linebacker 2, like hey, we're going to go this approach. This is our way to go. We need our operators, our cyber operators, thinking and adjusting and developing their tactics, techniques, and procedures to give us that multi-access. In the case of cyber, it could be hundreds, thousands, or millions of access points. My mind can't even wrap around the magnitude of the task at hand for these young airmen that are in this industry right now or in this mission set and what they're going to do in the future. So after those stories, I think you guys are probably ready for me to move on to something else. So virtually every mission success across the range of military operations depends on cyber. But I think rapid advances in the capabilities of potential adversaries as well as technology that is proliferating widely among both states and non-states, they threaten our advantage in this domain. Some specific challenges in building and extending and securing the Air Force cyber domain include: 1, ensuring the electromagnetic spectrum is available for future military use in the face of mounting commercial pressure. 2, leveraging the exponential increase in personal mobile devices in balance with cybersecurity. 3, addressing information security pertaining to data aggregation as the DoD moves to a broader cloud construct. And finally, recruiting, educating, training, and retaining cyber airmen and remaining committed to the integration throughout the life cycle of weapon system development while contending with existing fiscal headwinds. So for mission success in tomorrow's congested and contested environment, the Air Force requires a centralized strategic direction in developing and sustaining those operations both in, from, and through cyberspace. So moving forward, the foundation to our future success is our people. And I see a number of young people, JD excluded, wearing ABUs out here, because JD and I are the same age. And I have grandkids. I don't know if JD is, but I don't qualify as young. But I see a number of people in ABUs out here. These folks are our future. They're going to be enabled by architecture. They're going to be enabled by industry. But this really is the future of our cyber force capabilities. And I think identifying the right people early on is an imperative. We're working right now to develop the next generation of those cyber warriors. So organizing as an air staff, training and equipping, and then educating those airmen to be experts in the core missions which they contribute. So to that end, we are pioneering a study with the University of Maryland Center for Advanced Study of Language to establish an initial Air Force Cyber Aptitude Battery. This will enable the assessment of a recruit's cognitive skills for cyber warfare and ability, and it'll assist us in the placement of the right airmen into the cyber workforce. Once that assessment is proven, we're going to be using it in conjunction with other pre-screening tools to identify the recruits well suited for cyber warfare operations, and will be administered in part of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery to pre-screen those recruits. Second, we must then give them the right training. And that training needs to be tailored to meet the needs of a generation that's already very comfortable in this IT world. We're going to adapt our cyber training syllabi to accommodate not only high potential candidates that have no previous cyber experience, but those we recruit who already have some expertise in the field, allowing those seasoned operators to bypass some of the rudimentary training in order to transition them more rapidly to advanced instruction and operational employment. You don't want to take a young recruit in that's got an associate's degree, he's got multiple Microsoft certifications, maybe a bachelor's degree in this career field, maybe some time working in that, and then make him go back and learn how to turn a computer on and have a class on this is RAM, this is this, and so on. We have to tailor our course to where our airmen are today, and I know it's a big, big deal to speed that process along. And so to best ensure the readiness of those forces, I think we also must develop a series of metrics, and I liken it to the Ready Aircrew program that we have in the flying world. So listen carefully. This is to kind of determine the type and the appropriate number of training events a cyber operator will need to complete during a period of time in order to be proficient in their job. So those of you that work on platforms, whether it's a SIGINT platform or some kind of a cyber platform defending or doing offensive capabilities, what are the number of things that you need to do? What tasks do you need to have? Not just the training you've had in the past or certification you had 2 years ago. What do you need to do from a recency and currency perspective so that when we put you on the console to execute a very hard mission set where one keystroke could screw the whole thing up, you know, what kind of training, where do you need to be in proficiency? So I liken it to when I did a 38-hour combat mission on night 1 of Iraqi Freedom. We had 5 refuelings. We had a target sequence complex through downtown Baghdad. 6 B-2s met up in the airspace of Iraq on that first night. Some of us had targets against Saddam Hussein and his 2 sons, and under command and control, some palaces. And because of the location of the targets, we had no room for error. In fact, we had timed how long our bomb doors would be open and how long they could be before a surface-to-air missile could see us and then get our bomb doors closed before we could go back into a kind of a tighter stealth signature. We had no air. So we did mission rehearsal sims over and over and over again so that we could do this in our sleep. Air refueling on a 38-hour mission, you've got to be able to get the gas. So we wanted to make sure our pilots were very proficient in air refueling. So what then are the parallels in the cyber workforce? If a person is on vacation for a while, they come back on, do they have to ramp up, do some training events, do an exercise? Do we have the LVC ranges where our cyber airmen can actually exercise and practice their skill set without the adversaries kind of seeing what we're doing? We have to really think through that before we put our members on the platforms to do the offensive and defensive missions. So I think this community is ready to start taking a new approach, maybe a Ready Air Crew program. We won't call it Air Crew, we'll call it something else, Ready Cyber Crew. I don't know what we're going to call it. I think some of our young airmen will figure out that in the time ahead. So beyond basic cyber training, we need to tie full spectrum operations into the cyber domain, into that area that I talked about, the live virtual constructive. We need to ensure that they can train and that they can exercise, and then they can conduct tailored, realistic rehearsals at the individual, at the force package, and the campaign levels, using full spectrum of your capabilities. How often do you get frustrated because I can't do that? I'm not allowed to use that particular, I can't flip that switch. If you look at in the EW environment, we would go on the ranges at Nellis and we weren't allowed to use our warfighting tapes. It gets a little frustrating to the airmen when they can't use the real stuff. I think in the cyber domain, we need to have the training exercises and platforms where our cyber offense and cyber defense can use the full spectrum of their capabilities. Additionally, the Air Force is going to establish a Cyber Innovation Center, and it's going to provide a centralized environment where our airmen can work hand in hand with industry, academia, and agency partners to push the leading edge of technology. And so to engender more effective integration, the Air Force has created a new cyber weapons instructor course at Nellis Air Force Base. It's designed to teach highly capable cyber operators how to best synergize their capabilities into the entire spectrum of Air Force and joint operations. And so although cutting edge technology is important, it's, like I said earlier, our airmen who are the true game changers. Our cyber warriors at the weapons school continue to be prime catalysts for this multi-domain operational integration and approach. And they do it by proactively working in concert with their counterparts from the combat air forces, from the mobility air forces, from space, from the special forces, and the rescue weapons instructor courses. They are, right now, developing more effective ways of fighting, helping to synergize those effects into a more conventional Air Force capabilities. And they're playing a big role in outthinking and out-innovating our cyber adversaries. So while we do this, we're also leveraging the Air Force's reinvigorated Education with Industry program. The first of 2 internships, new internships, were to VMware, or going to be to VMware and USA, and they're going to have an immediate impact on strengthening Air Force cyber skills. And finally, Air University is seeking to establish a cyber college to provide advanced education to warfighters, cyber operators, and commanders through tailored solutions. So we've talked a little bit about assessing, recruiting, training. Now how about retaining those operators for the duration? We're pursuing a number of different initiatives to meet that intent. For example, Stripes for Certs is a program used to recruit airmen who have proven competency and skills in the cyberspace domain. And although the money is small at this point, eligible recruits are awarded Airman First Class Stripes for a 6-year enlistment, which is similar to other career fields, and then they get a monetary bonus. And that bonus, I said, is small. It's about $3,000, but it is something to sweeten the pot. We're also offering special duty pay, selective re-enlistment bonuses, a critical skills retention bonus, and looking to improve our civilian grading and hiring practices, all to make pay and benefits more competitive with commercial sector. We may never be able to compete with the commercial sector in this, but we can help close that gap. We're also looking for innovative ways to increase our capacity for operating in and through cyberspace. We're piloting, you may have already heard this week, the Com Squadron Next concept to leverage cyberspace to protect and ensure the ability to generate and execute a wings mission by doing a number of things. Executing the internal defense measures and obtaining external defense support as needed. Providing cyberspace situational awareness and assessments for cyber readiness. And then third, determining the wings' key cyber terrain and assessing the risk to mission and means to mitigate that identified risk. Those cyber or Com Squadron Next will morph into what we're calling cyber op squadrons in the operations groups, and we're going to do that in the very near future at select wings, with the goal of fully leveraging the cyber domain in support of those wings missions. Now we expect this will lead to new operational approaches and create a demand signal for new capabilities while also helping create this next generation of operators. Cyberspace squadrons, they're going to integrate the operations within the Air Force's operational missions in total. They will connect to both the Air Force and the DoD cyberspace capabilities to ensure that we're effective across the full spectrum of military operations. So as we adjust our focus for the future, we have, I think, a bright path ahead. We're working with our acquisition community. A number of talks this week about that, and I'm sure General Teague will talk a little bit about that as well, to ensure that all new systems, new weapons, as well as business and mission systems and mission support structures are defensible once they're fielded, and that we prioritize the assessment and mitigation of those risks to currently field systems through what we're calling a risk management framework. So imagine, if you will, a Viper, an F-16. This jet has a lot of components. It has a lot of threat surfaces. It has a lot of touch points which people can get in and out, both through direct and or networks and signals. And so when it's flying, its radar, its data links, its radios, and various other sensors are sending out lots of data, lots of ones, lots of zeros. Conversely, that fighter is being bombarded by lots of ones and lots of zeros. And with each data transmission and receipt providing the opportunity for an adversary to compromise various systems on the aircraft. As we heard from Pete Kim earlier this week on Task Force Cybersecure, the Air Force is working to bake in, I hate to use a cooking, not HGTV, that's the Food Network, a Food Network analogy, where we're trying to bake in this cybersecurity into the acquisition process. And we're committed. We're committed to also collaborating more closely with the industrial sector, leveraging their innovation. And you heard some of that yesterday from Juniper Networks and some of the things that they're doing. They're thinking about problem sets, and they will enable us to get where we need to go faster than we could go on our own. The Air Force is doing many things to harness that innovation, and we're doing it in places like Silicon Valley, in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Austin, Texas. If you haven't heard of the Defense Innovation Unit Experimentation, it's a small, agile, cross-functional, joint organization that we've placed some of our airmen in Silicon Valley. And they're looking to build and strengthen existing relationships, develop new relationships, scout for breakthrough and emerging technologies, and they're serving kind of as our Air Force point of presence in that region. They're made up of active duty, civilian and reserve personnel, and they're going to help communicate our most difficult national strategic or national security challenges to those innovators, problem solvers, and entrepreneurs. And they'll serve as kind of matchmakers between those ideas and then opportunities within the services. We're also working with DARPA, the Air Force Research Lab, the national labs, civilian universities, and military colleges like our own Air Force Academy, which has its own cyber center, and the Air Force Institute of Technology. And finally, we're committed to continue to work with our closest allies and partners where we can through various engagements. So, in closing, the Air Force has a cyber foundation, and I've mentioned that that cyber foundation is our airmen. We're aggressively working to grow a more robust and capable force, but we're not there yet. This is a long-term project. We're seeking to develop that force that affords us that freedom of maneuver in cyberspace and fully integrate it into our Air Force core missions while we deny our adversaries the same freedom of maneuver. So the path to fully integrating and operationalizing our cyber force will be arduous. I'm confident that we have a sound plan for recruiting, assessing, training, educating, and employing the best cyber force in the world. Conflict that we know it has fundamentally changed. State, non-state actors, trans-regional terrorist organizations, they're investing significantly in developing their own cyber capabilities to deny us access and degrade or destroy our conventional capabilities. We must adapt, or we'll find ourselves unprepared to counter the modern threats to our core missions. So outthinking, out-innovating our cyber adversaries will be challenging, but with our strong existing cyber foundation and continued close collaboration with academia, industry, and our partners, I'm confident that your Air Force is up to the task. Thank you for your attention this morning, and now I'll open it up to questions and answers. Remember, I'm an operator, and so if you go too deep in any area, I'll pivot back to what I know the best. So I'm open for any questions.
Thank you. During the conference's opening session, the Secretary of the Air Force talked about shifting from a preponderance of effort protecting the network to more priority for actually accomplishing operational actions in the cyber area. Do you see this shift inside the Pentagon in programs, funding, or planning activities?
Okay, that's a great question for an operator. Programs, planning. I do see that shift, not only in word, but in deed. I already mentioned the $4.2 billion in FY17, the almost $700 million for the cyber mission force. We have to build this capability with the people, and we have to then build on top of that those things that sustain those people and then the systems that they operate. So it is not just words from our secretary. She is spot on. The actions are following the deeds, and you will see that not only in the budget we just submitted, but you'll see it in future budgets in the future as we begin to fully build out this force. 39 teams may not be enough. That 2,400 experts in offense and defense may not be enough. But like in any situation that we've been in as Air Force, as we get down the road and as the terrain looks different down that road, we'll adjust fire. But her words are spot on, and General Holmes is going to speak later. If you want to re-ask that question to the planner and program, I'm sure he'd love to take that. Sorry there, General Holmes.
Thank you, sir. Could you expand on the Air Force Cyber Innovation Center? When and where will it be established? Is it in the budget yet? And how can industry partner now or in the future?
Okay, I don't know. Who's asking the questions? Is there somebody around here? Oh, it's coming from the back. So it's coming from online? I got it. Sounded like the same person. You know, normally when a person asks a question, you want to look at him and say, and look him in the eye and say, hey, and see if I answered your question. So where, as we do cyber innovation centers and whatnot, as we stand up new mission and those types of things, there will be some type of a strategic basing action that takes place. So no decision has been made to yet where. We would have to take a look as a service and say, where do we have the expertise? Where do we already have the bandwidth? Where do we have the training and the educational institutions that we've partnered with to feed that type of a cyber innovation center? And it could be in a number of places. A lot of you in this industry would think, well, why not around Maryland? Why not around San Antonio? Why not around Colorado Springs? Those are definitely probably some really good options. But to location, none has been made yet. And could you fill in that second part of that question for me again? There was like 3 or 4 parts to that.
Is it in the budget, and how can industry partner?
I don't know if it's in the budget. I don't think it is yet. And industry could always partner, and they have in the past. There have been a number of partnership efforts. I know from my experience at Barksdale, we had a cyber innovation center as they were looking at that location. And they have a lot of capability. Industry does. They have partnered with the DoD and then other governmental agencies in this mission set. So industry can help, but we need to work closely with industry so that they're not investing in the wrong places, and that our work together can be helpful, and that they're not taking too much risk in getting out ahead of the service before we make a decision on bed down and our own budget priorities. So I would look to the future in the next POM maybe or after that to see where that's going to take place. Next question.
Thank you. Regarding global strike, are we closing seams between COCOMs and planning and operations, as well as we are closing seams within the Air Force?
Yes, but that takes work. And one of the ways that the combatant commanders have gotten after this is that a lot of the exercise dollars, those are under budget pressures as well. So Tier 1 exercises, a lot of times, which had been by themselves focused on just that combatant commander's requirements, objectives, and needs, they've branched out, and they include more COCOMs in those Tier 1 exercises. The last one I did before I left, General Breedlove's staff played at UCOM, NORTHCOM staff played, TRANSCOM staff played, and STRATCOM. So that's 2 geographics focused on Homeland Defense, and then a fight in UCOM. Strategic Command played, and then of course TRANSCOM plays in almost everything because the movement, logistical forces, and stuff of that nature. So we fight like we train, and then we exercise to meet that need. The combatant commands have started to close the gaps, and it's when you exercise with real staffs, not white cells or exercise staffs, that you really start to get after those basic blocking and tackling. You find out where the chinks in your armor are, and you can kind of fit those together. So I'd say that the combatant commands have, through practice, started to close those things in through how they exercise to fight.
That was our final question for General Vander Hamm. At this time, please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood back to the stage to formally thank him on behalf of Afcea and our audience for his presentation today.
Let's give General Vander Hamm a hand.